Hello, BookTube, and welcome to a potentially new series, an occasional series. It'll be the primary focus will be poets and their poetry, but also if they wrote other things, I will sort of briefly discuss those. In no way am I an expert on these authors. When I've read a little more deeply their poetry, I have looked up information or looked in my volumes here of the Oxford National Biography. Uh, Half the material I forget. So I will not be going into any deep dives in this. It's just to sort of acquaint maybe people or bring to attention some poets that have basically been forgotten, in time. It sort of fits with Mark from Book Time with Elvis's on eyes and mine eyes. Um, Forgotten authors, and they do, but we are concentrating a lot, well, for the most part, on authors there that have written short stories or novels. And some of these authors may have written some fiction, but I'm going to concentrate on their poetry. And if they wrote some essays, as this one did, I will talk briefly about those as well. This author was on my extended essay list. His name is Henry Austin Dobson, or better known in most of the writing is Austin Dobson. I came across him from his essays and then found out that he was a poet, so I looked for his poetry. And I got this 2 volume, which I really like these, by Keegan Paul Trench and Company. They're about the size of a mass market paperback, and they have their emblem gold embossed there, gold, and this is called Poems on Several Occasions. It's a collection of all, well, I don't know if it's everything, so I don't want to say that per se, but this edition was published in 1889, and it has what I really like. I'll just briefly say, turn the light on there so I could read the poetry, but I might have to change that. I like the red printing there, and the symbol as well there. This one is an added one. It has the bookseller sticker, a very large one. Usually you don't see them this large. By T. Richardson, bookseller, 5 Whitehill Street, Glasgow, E1. Anybody in Glasgow are familiar? Is any chance that T. Richardson bookshop is still in business, or is there a different bookshop at this address? Anyway, it's, as I say, these are nice books. They call them deckled edges now, but it's just untrimmed, same as the bottom, but they have gilt top edge. And Henry Austin Dobson lived from 1840 to about 1921ish, I think it was, if memory serves. He was a civil servant, but he started writing poetry and essays, mostly 18th century for his essays and biographies. We'll get to the essays in a minute. But he brought back, for the time, styles of poetry that were sort of French styles that either never were adapted to English poetry, or that hadn't been for a long time. Again, I'm no expert in poetry in any way, nor these authors. So it's just a very brief, general sort of introduction for things. So I'm going to read one of his poems here, and I do apologize. I'm not the best at reading at the best of times, but with my long COVID. But I hope you get a sense of this. It's called My Books. They dwell in the odor of camphor. They stand in a Sheridan shrine. They are warranted early editions, those worshipful tones of mine. In their creamiest Oxford vellum, in their redolent crushed levant, with their delicate watered linings, they are jewels of price, I grant. Blind tooled and morocco jointed, they have Bedford's dainted dress. They are graceful, attentive, polished, but they gather the dust no less. For the roe that I prize is yonder, away on the unglazed shelves, the bulged and the bruised octavos, the dear and dumpy twelves. Montaigne, with his sheepskin blistered, and Howell, the worse for wear, and the worn drilled Jesuit's Horace, and the little old cropped Moliere, and the Burton I bought for a florin, and the Rabelais foxed and fleed. For the others I have never opened, but those are the books I read. And he does play around with rhyme. He plays around with meter, sometimes in the same poems. He does things. He does things that are sort of similar to what Swinburne did, the rondels, which was a French style, but I think it was Swinburne that brought it into English. And he does a lot of dialogues in his poetry as well. And the 3 volumes that I have of his essays are called 18th Century Vignettes. This is the 3rd volume in the center, but it's faded spine. This one has an interesting, it's signed by him to Lord Stoosberg, it looks like, or Stoosberg. I'll hold it up to the screen, maybe somebody can see it, in 1902. I don't know if that's readable, but when I first got it, I did do a search and nothing came up. I couldn't identify specifically who that was. But they are literally 18th century vignettes, little off biographical information. He also wrote biographies as well. I remember coming across the list and seeing Hogarth, and I'm sure there's others. And yeah, just various topics. Let's just say this is the volume 3. I won't be reading something from this one. Let me get to the title. Yeah, here. Dr. Mead's Library, Grosley's Laundress, Thomas Gent, Printer, The Arrival of Reynolds, Fielding's Library, Cambridge, The Everything. That's a quote from a letter from Horace Walpole. Matthew Prior, the tour of Covent Garden, I remember it being quite interesting. But yeah, it's that type of thing where you get literally they're vignettes of certain things. I'll just read the beginning of this one here, Goldsmiths Library. An auctioneer's catalog, and particularly an auctioneer's catalog more than 100 years old, is not at first sight the most suggestive of subjects, and yet that issued in July 1774 by Mr. Good of 121 Fleet Street still possesses considerable interest, for it is nothing less than an account, bald indeed, and only moderately literary, of the household furniture, with a selected collection of scarce, curious, and valuable books in English, Latin, Greek, French, Italian, and other languages, late the library of Dr. Goldsmith, deceased. That was a quote. Well, I guess that's the title, or subtitle. As one runs over the items, one seems to realize the circumstances. One seems almost to see Mr. Good's unintentional assistants with their pens behind their ears and their ink bottles upon the excise principle dangling from their buttonholes as they peer about the dingy chambers of Brick Court, with the dark little closet of a bedroom at the back where the poor doctor lay and died. We can imagine that sniffing superciliously at the chief pictorial adornment, quote, the tragic muse, in a golden frame, or drawing from his sheath with an air of pretense connoisseurship the steel-hilted sword inlaid in gold, or the black-hilted dito not until speculations as to how these weapons would adorn their own ungainly persons in a holiday jaunt in White Conduit House or Marylebone Gardens. And it just goes on. Um, and here's another little bit. As for the books, the select collection that the unsympathetic stock takers turned over so irreverently with their feet as they lay in dusty ranges on the floor, it must be feared that worthy Mr. Good's description of them as scarce, curious, and valuable is more credited to his business traditions than his literary insight. Goldsmith was scarcely a book lover in the sense in which that term is now used. The man who, as Hawkins relates, could tear half a dozen leaves out of a volume to save himself the trouble of transcription, the man who underscored objectively passages with his thumbnail, as he once did in a new poem that belonged to Reynolds, as not a genuine amateur deliver. So yeah, so it goes on, and this is the type of thing. I love this stuff. I love essays. I love poetry. So I dabble in these other things, and they, I would go into a bookshop here, and I would pull off. If I saw something that looked like essays, I'd pull it off and look at it and go, "Oh, that's interesting. How much it is?" If somebody I never heard of, usually a lot of times it wasn't. Some was. I sought out certain authors. Austin Dobson, I sort of recognized him slightly, the name, because I think, if I remember right, when I did look him up, there is some connection with Andrew Lang and other writers. I think they were all sort of, in bed together in a sense, that they all were of the same time and of the literary society, that they had connections with themselves, with each other. And so I picked this stuff up, and then same as poetry. So as we go through, I'll be showing sometimes, as far as I know, maybe the only published book by that poet. If this is something that you're interested in, and sometimes I know nothing about the author, because if it's the single book that was published by them, I don't think I could never find information on them. But nevertheless, they could be interesting, and it's obviously in the public domain. But anyway, let me know if it's something that you're interested in, and I can continue this. Do sound out in the comments. Anyway, I will see you next time, either with possibly one of these or something else. Take care, BookTube.